Thanks, everyone. I hope you can see that okay. I'm Helena Patterson. I'm in the School of Psychology at the University of Glasgow. Now School of Psychology and Neuroscience. I'm part of the PsyTeachR team. We redeveloped our curriculum a number of years ago to teach reproducibility in psychology. And part of that whole thing was kind of coding and things like that, but also these things related to generative AI really fits in very much with what we try to do, which is teach some flexibility around our students. So today I'm going to really talk a little bit about my experience over the last year of trying to see how I could use generative AI to help me and other teachers to teach, but also for students to learn. When I started this work, it was very much at the time when people were quite uncertain and we didn't have much guidance at the time, or people didn't really think about it very much, and it was very much the doom and gloom at the time. Sorry. So I was much more interested in, I don't like doom and gloom, and I was much more interested in, well, the other part of the message we were trying to send to our students, which was how could we use these things? How could we use this properly in our lives and things like that? And I thought I would start with what I know. Because I don't actually know very much about how it might be used in the workplace. I'm still waiting for those stories and things like that, but I thought that I know my workplace and I know my students, and I would start there. So I started with just how we could use it in my practical classes. And I have a companion course to one of my courses. My course has about 400 students on it. I have online distance learning students, I have MSc students, and I have level 3 and 4 students. So across the board, quite a lot of people who do this one core course. And I thought that would be quite a good place to start in terms of teaching students and seeing how we could possibly use it. So I've got 4 things I'm going to talk about today, hopefully very briefly. Learning, science, and Gen AI. So basically how I use what I know about cognitive psychology and learning and trying to link that to perk it up a little bit for students. Writing, kind of like how do we use it for writing? Some of my students are dissertation students and they wanted to use it as research assistants. And then just some active learning ideas that I have for the upcoming session. The QR link there takes you to some teacher tips. It's just a resource that I'm developing and where I'm collecting all the different examples if you want to look afterwards. Okay, so first of all, generative AI presented a big structural change for us. It's still continuing to be quite disruptive, but one of the things with structural change is, from what I know of psychology, is that it allows you to make people build new habits, to change the way that they do things and things like that. So I thought I would tap into this a little bit and see if I could use it to help students perk up their study skills. Now, study skills is always one of these kinds of things that sits in parallel to what you're teaching, and the students choose to engage with it or not. You get to the end of the year and you see the exams, and you have students come to visit you afterwards wanting to know what's going wrong, and you start interrogating their study skills, and you find out that actually, if they had just listened to some of these lessons earlier on, they would have succeeded a little bit better. Not all students are like that. Quite a lot of students actually then use it. But I thought this could be a really nice way of introducing students to generative AI while also perking up their study skills a bit. So one of the first lessons I did was to teach students a little bit about their learning, to introduce concepts like retrieval practice from learning science and link this to a specific lesson. And for retrieval practice, you need to be able to get some questions. And one of the good things that generative AI does is for fairly general concepts, it can give you a few conceptual questions or a few quiz questions. Asking questions is quite a predictable activity, so it's pretty good at that. It doesn't actually need to know much about the content in order to come up with a fairly good structural process, really. And then the next week, so what I got students to do is I encouraged them to generate questions from the topics that we were studying, and then the next week to come back and revisit that. So it's a very simple intervention that should hopefully get them into the habit of coming back and revisiting their materials a week later. And I could use that as kind of prompts and things like that. At the time, there wasn't the students didn't have the ability to use Jane AI for free or through a subscription through the university. They do now. So at the time, what I did was I generated the questions for them in case they didn't want to, or they didn't want to sign up for a contract, or they didn't have access to something, or they didn't want to use it. And I'll probably continue that practice, thinking about the ethics associated with this. One person using this rather than 10 people using it might be one of the concepts that I'll continue to encourage students to think about. How could we share the work that we do so that the impact might be smaller if we are worried about that. And then a discussion point. So this is the other thing with all my things is kind of like things I still don't know. While I can say that now students have access to Copilot through our university subscription, is it still really safe? Could I upload text from my readings and from other things? Is it really a safe thing? Do we still continue to make these questions for students? Okay. A second part also related to learning science is, again, pre and post lecture questions. So I used Copilot for this one, and I literally just uploaded some of those transcripts from my video lecture. So the course is a blended course, so there's video transcripts as well as in-person transcripts, as well as in-person lectures. But generally, the video things, it helps to give students an opportunity to ask questions and stuff like that. Video can be quite difficult to learn from if you don't approach it with some kind of a scaffold. And so I uploaded, actually I just did this yesterday. I uploaded some of my video transcripts and got Copilot to give me questions, just questions on the transcript. And it quite willingly came up with quite a lot of things. And these are things that I would just be able to pick and choose a few questions before you start this video. Think about this. Once you have finished this video, think about this. Questions to help people engage with the lecture a little bit more. There are some challenges. The free thing on Copilot lets me upload 8,000 characters, which is about 10 minutes of lecture, about 1,400 words. That's very rough because it doesn't always quite work out like that. So it is limited, and quite often what I have to do is I have to split things up a little bit, and this can be quite repetitive and boring. My question is still, even though people say it is part of our package and it is encrypted and they don't use the data that we share, is it really safe? Can I really upload text? Can I really upload things that I'm not supposed to have? So for instance, how does copyright work here? Can I upload, and the same goes for the presentation before, can I upload papers that I have access to that are core readings and things like that? And would it be safe to do that? So those are still questions I don't know the answers to. Maybe other people here do. Okay, the next one I came up with was trying to see how people could use it as a personal assistant. You'll see the themes here are very similar. It's still about learning science. It's still about the kinds of things that I can get students to do. So, but using it as a study guide. So some of those things that other people are writing programs for, and hopefully there will be software that I can use, or the Khan Academy will do this. I'll be able to do this. But I was thinking, how could a student use it as an assistant for themselves to generate the kinds of things that they need to study with? So I introduced students to the idea of spaced practice, which is something else from learning science. And the idea that you don't just come back and revise things at random, but you come back and you make yourself a program of doing that, and that there are specific ways in which you can do that, which are better than other things. This is what we know from cognitive psychology. So the idea of spaced practice is you see something one week, you revisit it another week, you allow some forgetting to happen, and you revisit the ideas again. And the schedule that you come up with is quite important now. It's pretty unique for each individual, so you have to have a bit of trial and error, and you have to learn a little bit about this. But you can use generative AI to make those schedules for you, to make up a schedule and then edit it a little bit for your own purposes, depending on how many things you have, how many stuff. And more the thing with this was to use the AI as a kind of like exploration tool, see what kinds of things they come up with, and then use that to learn a little bit more about your own learning. So students do need a little bit more of a prompt here, a little bit more advice. And a discussion point here is, for me, is kind of like, okay, I'm teaching psychology, but I'm teaching social psychology. I'm not teaching cognitive psychology. So how much of my class and how much of the students' time should I be devoting to this kind of thing? Where is the line in terms of what is the content that my students are interested in versus just using it as a gimmick? And I think that is something that I have to continue reflecting on as I make these lessons. Okay, another version of using it as a personal assistant is that I made a lesson to introduce depth of processing. So the idea that if you access information in a variety of different ways, that is kind of like almost like a shortcut towards more depth of processing. So that you go from things being related to your episodic memory to things being related to your semantic memory or being in your semantic memory store. And that really only happens through practice and access. Now, normally what I would do is I would give students maybe 3 readings, get them to think about, 3, fairly short things, all saying very similar things, but from different perspectives. Or just through the process of reading papers, they would be coming across the same concepts from in different perspectives. Maybe there would be a video, maybe there would be a worksheet, all kinds of different things. But how could we use Gen AI to help with this? And one of the things that I thought would be helpful is if you link it to your learning objectives and ask it to generate the key terms. Now, the idea here is that you do have to link it to learning objectives, and this is kind of like a useful thing for students to learn as well. The idea that it's not just, you can ask it anything and it will produce anything, but then you need to bound it and connect it a little bit to the things that you want that you're wanting to study, that you wanted to look at. And so connecting it to the learning objectives, I got it to prompted it to get key terms. And that was quite a useful thing. And it also helps me to teach about prompts that are more specific to the course. So kind of like, instead of making a lesson about prompt learning, it's sort of like learning the skills to be able to develop these prompts and be more specific. This is also incidentally a skill that I'm asking my students throughout to do, which is to link readings or other things to the learning objectives of the course and lessons, which helps them to then contextualize and scaffold their learning within this framework that I'm trying to teach them. Again, there's a lot of knowledge out there, but structuring it and frameworking it is one of the key things that's there. Okay, the other thing I was interested in was Gen AI and writing. My course has an assessment that requires a student to write a short position statement and then replies to other students' things. So it's like an online debate. And of course, the thing is that you can easily get an AI to write these questions. The questions tend to be quite broad. I haven't noticed any students using it inappropriately, but obviously there's that. So one of the things that I'm trying to encourage them to do, preempting this, is to look at Gen AI as any kind of other source. Treat it like any other source that you would come across, and show people how to integrate it in their research and writing in the correct way. So asking them things like, how would you treat knowledge given by a friend, knowledge through a Google search, knowledge from Wikipedia, knowledge heard on a news program, read in a newspaper or anything like that. One of the QAA benchmark developments in our most recent update has been a call that we get students to integrate knowledge from a variety of different sources, not just academic articles, but also to start looking at how they use these different things. And so I kind of like use it as an example of that. You know, there's different kinds of information, and the way that you would critically evaluate that information differs. Critical evaluation or evaluation of any kind of source is already a strong part of us. At the beginning there, I told you I'm part of the CiteHR team, and the idea of reproducibility in our particular science has been very important, because we found that there's quite a lot of work that doesn't reproduce. And so the criticality of any source, whether it's a journal article that's been peer reviewed, or whether it's a newspaper article, or whether it's somebody's personal account, that is kind of really important. So I'm using it as a way of teaching people, you know, on the spectrum of criticality. The other one is, so the idea is to evaluate the source. The other one is, how would you acknowledge a structure developed? So the other thing is, we try to teach people through exemplars. For instance, if you find a really good journal article, how about using the structure of that, what you learn about that, and how those people are communicating, to write your own research reports? But how would you acknowledge the source of a structure, for instance? So it's the same as anything else. And so I came up with a grid that I share with students. I'm not going to go through the whole of it because I'm going to run out of time, but I'll share it. I'll paste through them quickly, and you can look at them afterwards. I've uploaded the slides to the Padlet for you. But it's the idea of kind of like, there's 3 steers. One is how, you know, if you were to generate the ideas, if you were to come up with it, what it would look like. What ideas look like that come from another source or from AI? And then how would you use that? How would you acknowledge that in your writing? So with particular examples, and there was 3 different levels at which I do this. But the idea is that, you know, people need to have synthesis. Okay, so the next thing was that 2 of my dissertation students came to me with ideas of how to use AI, and I was encouraging, because we don't have any rules against that at the moment. But really the point was to have a conversation with them about how they would use it. So one of my students didn't feel too confident about her analysis skills. So she wanted to use ChatGPT specifically to make code to solve some specific problems in processing her data and analysis skills. Now, this, it turns out, all in the problem. So I didn't discourage her, but I was also very clear with her that, you know, it's not necessarily going to be the answer. And that turned out to be the case. It didn't actually solve her issues of not being able to understand the things that she was struggling with. And this led me to understand very much that the same message that we always have. So we have a poster up in our lab, which for code is this: keep calm and Google it, because we don't have an issue with students doing that, because we know that learning the specific words of how to Google it actually becomes really important. And there's not a shortcut to that kind of knowledge. Another student had a very specific task. There was something that neither of us knew a lot about that she wanted to do. She wanted to find some names that that would be very unusual for one of her prompts in an experiment. And so she used ChatGPT, like Google it, but a bit better, or as somebody said before, Wikipedia on speed. Again, it was very much in the prompts, but this time we did a bit of a better job in that. And I can give you just an example. She allowed me to share this example of her write-up of how she used it. So there is a bit in her dissertation where she acknowledged using it and how she used it and what she did with that. So I thought that this was kind of a nice thing to share. But in both those cases, it worked. I have maybe a very short minute left. to talk a little bit about some of the future plans that I have. So things that I'm thinking of for the upcoming session, which is active learning within the class. So a think, pair, and compare task. So instead of think, pair, share, this time would be think about something, generate something in Gen AI, and compare your knowledge to what it came up with, and maybe do that with a friend or do it with yourself. So this would be a classroom activity that I'm thinking of doing. The other one is, which somebody had mentioned already, but part of the things that I try to teach is about bias. So that's kind of like an important part of the social psychology curriculum. And so one of the lessons I'm thinking about is how can we use AI to reveal the biases that are already there. And the Copilot gives access to image generation through DALL-E. But the thing is that every time you ask it for a prompt, it will come up with something slightly different, so something a little bit different, which means that in a class situation, you can get maybe 10 pairs of students or 50 pairs of students generating images all either on the same prompt or any prompts that they come up with. And this would actually give us quite a lot of data that we can compare in the class. Here are two that I came up with. One was a HIV test awareness campaign poster session, and the other one was give me examples of romantic love. And already I could see there are quite a lot of things that we could discuss as a class in terms of generalizability, in terms of what the images say, and things like that. Another one is that idea of getting access to things fairly quickly. So an in-class research task about decolonizing the curriculum, for instance, using generative AI to find female or minority group neurodiverse writers in different areas, and then to go and verify that information, to go and actually look up that information, find out more about the person, which I thought would be quite a nice task to do. So just a quick summary there. This again is an image. For some reason, DALL-E gives you lots of spelling mistakes when you ask for prompts. It's quite annoying. But in summary, I'm looking at it as a tool. It's quite disruptive, and it gives us a tool for engaging students, using what I know of cognitive psychology and learning science to decide how the lessons are going to look, and contextualizing in terms of any other tools and source of information. As people here have already said, the output is only as good as what you put into it. And really that subject-specific knowledge that students are going to need in order to make good prompts is the thing that is still quite important for them to learn. Thank you.